All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining tonight. My name is Jackie Snyder. We've done a few of these speaker sessions with me. So thank you for joining again tonight. So we have Dr. Shawahin. I'm going to say it wrong again. I'm sorry.
Okay, it's Shawahin, yeah.
Shawahin.
Mhm.
She is a professor in psychology and counseling here at Governor State, and she's going to talk to us about having difficult conversations with children. Okay, so welcome, Doctor. Thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thanks for having me. Welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to do this with you. I prepared a brief presentation today because I know we only have about 30 minutes. And what I wanted to do here is to really just get your mind kind of thinking about this idea of having difficult conversations or difficult dialogues with children. And then hopefully during the video presentations, that you'll get in January, you'll be able to go a little bit more in depth on your own. But I figured since we're meeting and we're all here together, we might as well be a little bit more interactive in this presentation in comparison to the ones that you'll receive later. So just to start out, we're going to have a little brief introduction. We're going to have a poll where I'll ask you about your hopes for our time together. We'll have a brief presentation followed by small group dialogue, and then we'll regroup and share. And all throughout this, we're going to be using this application, which is called Poll Everywhere. So if you want to pull out your phones or if you're on a computer and you want to open up a different tab, you can go to polleverywhere.com, and then there will be a link that will pop up soon with instructions for you to use that software. By the end of this 30-minute presentation, you should be able to at least identify your own areas of growth around having difficult dialogues with children, to be able to identify key considerations to make when addressing difficult dialogues with children, and to be able to discuss strategies for having difficult dialogues with children. One of the things that we really need to take into account is that we know that having difficult dialogues with children can be very challenging to approach. Many people will avoid telling their children about difficult world events or even events in the family. And I'm sure all of us can maybe even think back to a time when we were a child and an adult might have kept something from us, right? So sometimes the reason why people are not having these conversations with their children has less to do with what the child can handle and has more to do with the adult's discomfort around having those discussions, right? One of the things that we need to keep in mind is that children can and do observe and absorb sometimes more than they're able to articulate or spit back at you, that they might make observations and not really be able to make sense of them. And so as the adult, helping to clarify those observations is part of our role. And of course, it becomes challenging when you're not the parent, when you're the teacher, or when you're a school worker of some sort, because then you kind of run into problems or challenges with, what does the parent want the child to know versus, what do I think is important for the child to know in this scenario? And we'll get to that a little bit later. So what I'd like you to do now is you can do this poll in a couple of different ways. So one way is you can go to pollev.com/, and then you type in the text that you see on the screen, or you can pull out your phone and send the code Lamise Shawa 129 and your response to the number 37607 over text message. So I'll give you just a couple minutes to answer that. And as you answer, those responses should be popping right up. Right. So these are, you can kind of take a look at the responses of your classmates as they were popping up, and it sounds like a lot of folks are hoping to get similar things out. Now, the challenge with, talking about techniques to discuss difficult conversations with children is that any conversation can be difficult depending on the context. And I'm going to demonstrate that to you with a couple of examples in just a bit. Understanding your own discomfort as well as the child's abilities is very important. It's really important to also consider that children have varying degrees of understanding that are going to be determined off of a variety of different factors, including their age, their cognitive ability, demographic characteristics. So for example, their gender, their race, their socioeconomic status, and environmental factors. So you can think about for one family, having a conversation about money might be a difficult conversation, right? But for another family that has more resources, having a conversation about money might not be as difficult as of a conversation. So these are some of the things to take into account, is that the context really matters and who you are really matters in relation to the child. So I want to, again, keep you guys engaged. So I have another poll here. What is one word you would you would use to describe how you feel about having difficult conversations with children? So one word, how does it feel when you think about what it might be like to start having these conversations? It looks like there's a lot of discomfort, nervousness, feelings of, feeling challenged in doing this, um, feeling concerned, right? That maybe this is a change in how you've been doing things usually. And I think these are really important feelings to note, because these feelings belong to you and not to the child. And sometimes in our work with children, we can take our feelings and project them onto the child. Like, I'm uncomfortable having this conversation. And so the way that I talk to the child about it is going to then make them uncomfortable as well, because they're kind of picking up on our feelings. So the first step, I think, to having difficult conversations with children is clarifying where your discomfort specifically is coming from. Are you worried that the child is going to have nightmares, for example, about it? Are you worried that the child just won't understand? Are you worried the child might disclose information to other people that maybe outside of the family that don't need to know private family information? So trying to identify what is the source of these feelings that you're having, I think, is a really good first step. So as we continue, I want you to sort of think through that. So just to demonstrate how any conversation can be difficult, imagine if you lived in this house on a busy street with a lot of car traffic. And I want to just bring it to the group. What difficult topic might you need to discuss with your child if you lived in this house on a busy street with a lot of car traffic?
Safety.
Safety, right? So you might need to have conversations with your child that other people might not need to have about, hey, when you cross the street, the cars are moving really fast. If they hit you, you can get really hurt. That conversation might not necessarily need to be had so young with a child. So if you have, let's say, a 2-year-old who's just learned how to walk, or a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, the conversation is going to look very different. And it's going to be a difficult conversation because you're going to be maybe for the first time introducing this idea that the child can get really, really hurt. That maybe that's not something that the child had considered prior to that point. So the context is important, your feelings are important, and then the child and where they're at is important. So similarly, imagine if you lived in this apartment building with high up balconies. That would be a different difficult conversation. You'd be talking about the danger of the height rather than the street. So you see how the context sort of changes the conversation that you're going to have with the child. Who the child is changes the conversation that you're going to have with the child. So to take it a step further, imagine you were a parent or a teacher of a Black child during the desegregation of American schools. And I want to open it up to the group again. What difficult topic might you need to discuss with your child in this case?
Racism.
Yeah, you might need to discuss racism. So you might need to have this conversation with the child and tell them that, hey, people might treat you poorly because of the color of your skin. And that's not a conversation that you would have to have necessarily with a white child, right? So the child, who the child is, what the context is, matters. So as you consider topics that would be difficult for you personally to discuss with a child, what are some of those topics that come to mind? And you can answer as many times as you want, but I'm asking that you respond with one-word answers. The topics that you're bringing up are certainly very, very difficult topics to discuss with a child. And some of them are going to require the help of a professional. Some of them are going to require the buy-in of a parent. Some of them can be discussed broadly as well to a whole class. So depending on the topic, depending on the context, any one of these difficult topics can be turned into a lesson that's pretty generic and removed enough to apply and speak to each child. They can be a one-on-one conversation with that child, or they can be done with the help of a professional, like a counselor or a psychologist or any other mental health professional, right? So if you're talking about something like abuse with a child or children in a classroom setting, it might start very, very basic at a young age with just talking about bullying and keeping your hands to yourself and not hurting other people, right? And what happens when people do hurt other people, right? How does that affect people? How might it make them feel? Like those are some just kind of zoomed out ways to talk about something like abuse with children. There's also a variety of different resources online, such as YouTube videos. There's a number of different YouTubers for each one of these topics that has created a series of children's videos that will help explain difficult concepts to children that can kind of supplement some of these conversations as well. So some examples of difficult scenarios that we haven't brought up through the poll are, imagine a scenario that actually a friend of mine went through, which is that she had her 6-year-old child was in a class with a child who had a developmental disability. And the child with the developmental disability, one of the things that he did was acting out in class through making various motions and sounds and movements. And her son started to replicate those behaviors at home. And so then it became time for her to then have a difficult conversation with her about how some children have disabilities and what that means and how that might affect the way that you interact with them in class. Another example might be if a child is exhibiting behavior that requires intervention, and that means having a difficult conversation. So maybe a child is being inappropriate with another child or touching inappropriately. Perhaps they're surfing online in ways that they shouldn't be, that those are difficult conversations to have with children as well. Things like a family experiencing a new addition, like a baby or an adoption, divorce, a move, any of these are difficult conversations to have with children that are often avoided. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that we make when we're having conversations with children is avoidance and not directly talking to them in a way that they can understand and in a way that's appropriate to their developmental level. There might be family changes that require a discussion with children, such as a parent acquiring a disability. Maybe that changes the family dynamic in some way. And it's important to not hide those things from children. There might be a child from a heterosexual family that befriends a child with same-sex parents, and they have play dates or start to get to know each other. And you might need to explain that different families might look differently to the child. A child might have a difficult time understanding their friends' religious holiday rituals, or even understanding that maybe not everybody celebrates Christmas. Things like that might be a difficult conversation to have with a child. And then finally, there's scary experiences that we all witness through the news, such as things like school shootings, things like crime, things like war, that these are all very, very difficult topics to have with children, or conversations to have with children. So we've got about 10 minutes left. And what I'd like to do is break you up into small groups. And in the small groups, I'd like you to discuss the barriers. So the things that get in your way of having difficult dialogues with children. And what I'd like you to do with your small groups is to brainstorm at least one solution to each barrier, or be prepared to share the barrier so that we can discuss it with the large group. And I will send these instructions in the chat as well.
Oh wow, سهلة هاي. I'm sorry.
Welcome back, everyone. So I wanted to just open it up for a second and see if anybody would be willing to share what they talked about in their small groups, share maybe one barrier and one solution. If you want to just raise your hand in the chat, and then I can call on you. Megan, go ahead.
We talked about a barrier being that like kids have like different family dynamics at home, and then one solution about that would be to allow them to like share with the class about their family, so they could bring in pictures of their family and like talk about the members of their family, so that everyone can see that like even though families are different, like that's still your family.
That's a really good solution. Yeah, I like that. Very cool. Would anyone else be willing to share? We'll take one more. I saw a couple people unmuted. Candace, were you unmuting?
Um, um, yes, we brought up like racism and stuff. Then somebody, Aisha, she recommended like doing the kids doing like a peace circle and talking about their problems, and we could try to come to end as a classroom.
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much, guys, for engaging in that conversation. You know, for the short time that we had together, we did cover a lot of ground, I think. And I hope that this conversation can be the start of your exploration of this topic more. There will be a series of 15-minute videos that I'll be sending out in January. The first one is going to be about specific strategies for talking about family dynamics with children. The second video will be about specific strategies for talking about diversity and culture. And then the third video will be about specific strategies for talking about world and local sort of issues with children. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to come today. There's just one more thing that I was going to ask you to do before you left, which is to please provide some feedback on this presentation. So I have a area here where you can join over the Poll Everywhere website. So on your way out and on to your next thing, if you can fill out some feedback on this presentation for me. That way I can incorporate your feedback into the presentations that I'll be sending you in January. Thank you all so much.
All right.
Take
Thank you
care.
all. Yes, thank you, Dr. Shawahin. Thank you very much. That was great. So yeah, we're definitely looking forward to your video recordings in the future. So I know they'll be very beneficial. So thank you everyone again. Have a good night and we will see you next month. Have a good one.
And then Jacquelyn, can you hang on just for a second?
Of course.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay.
I just wanted to check in because I wanted to make sure that the format I did it in was okay, because I figured this would be more of like an information gathering to kind of get a sense of like where folks were at and what their needs are. And then the presentations will be like kind of more in depth focused on the topics.
Yes, for sure. Because I mean, there's a lot of times that we get speakers on here and they only go in depth with like one area and then they miss out on so much. So this was like a good idea, like to figure out what, you know, everybody wants. I really like the poll that you did. That was great. So
Yeah.
yeah, so
Cool.
I think it'll be really beneficial to them. So yeah.
Okay, nice. So it seems like people enjoyed it because I'm looking through these responses here and it looks like for the most part, people are happy with it.
Awesome.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Yep, thank you so much. Yeah, people are saying they wish they had more time and then I'll address these things in the presentations for later.
Perfect.
All right, thanks so much.
All right,
Take care.
thank
Have a good
you.
one.
You
Bye-bye
too.
now.
Bye.